So imagine if we could understand sheep better. If we could actually just understand why sheep do the things that sheep do. If we could make our life easier in the way that we deal with sheep. Now, we've heard over the last couple of days, even on this stage, like on our main stage here, for our industry's premier event, we've heard people talk about how difficult sheep are, how hard sheep are to manage, how sheep spend their whole life trying to die. What if we could just understand them better? Make our life easier, make our businesses more profitable, make ourselves more productive. So that's what I want to spend this next little while. I want us all to imagine what that's like. I want to spend the next hour and a half thinking about how we can make our lives better. I think it's not just something that we need to think about. It's obviously something that I think we can actually do. I think as an industry, it's something that we should do. We should be understanding sheep better than we do. And it's not just that we should, I actually think that we must. If we want to keep pace with this cross-price squeeze that's happening, if we want to be able to keep pace with our consumer expectations, then we need to actually take the time to understand sheep better. And so that's what I want to spend this next hour and a half. Now, what it actually means, because we all spend our time at the moment running around being efficient, running around being productive, what I want us to do is slow down. I want us to slow down so that then we can speed up. And by that I mean actually stop and pay attention. That opener is all about taking the time to pause. So that's what we're going to do over this next hour and a half. We're going to take the time to pause and actually see some of the reasons that sheep do the things they do. Now, we're all guilty, all of us are guilty of saying this. At some point in our lives, we've said sheep are stupid. I'm here to tell you today that sheep aren't stupid, they're just a bit misunderstood. And so let's have a look at what that actually looks like. First of all, we've all seen this happen. You run sheep down a race and one of them jumps. And then everyone jumps. And you look at it and to the untrained eye, everyone says, bloody sheep are stupid. What are they jumping? There's nothing to jump about. If I took all of you out into the hallway and I made you run as fast as you could, one behind the other, and then someone thought they saw something scary, they're going to react to it. And if you're all running as fast as you possibly can, everyone else is going to react to it too. It's just a survival mechanism. But if we just look at it in simplistic terms, we look at it and see sheep jumping out the end of the race, or you're on the drafting gate, one jumps at you and you think, oh, bloody sheep are stupid. They're not stupid, they're just misunderstood. So how smart are they? For any of you that have been at LambEx before, you will know that we've heard before from Graham Martin about how the fact that sheep are capable of recognising each other. So they can recognise 50 faces for at least 2 years. That tells us straight away they're not dumb. If we take it a step further and we have a look at what Cambridge University has done, they did work to realise that sheep are capable of recognising human faces. So I'm going to show you a little bit. This is just a clip off YouTube, or some clips off YouTube. I'm going to show you the research that they did. But all they did was use photos of famous people, and they conditioned the sheep to recognise that face. So this is what it looks like. So they had a famous person, so they used Barack Obama, Emma Watson, a couple of others. The sheep was trained to recognise when it saw a face, that's where it's going to get a feed reward. And all they did, you'll see this one walk in, he finds Barack and realises that that's where you go to get a feed. So the question then comes is, are they recognising the face or is it just the image? So what they started to do was they started to actually put in some random faces. So they needed to work out, is it the face or is it just the image? They just put in random faces. So you've got the celebrity and a random face. And the sheep quickly worked out that they needed to go to the celebrity that they knew, that they'd been conditioned onto, because that's where the reward comes from. Now the question for us is, does that mean that they recognise us? In what we do, in our everyday lives, do they actually recognise us? So what they did in this experiment was all of those sheep had handlers that dealt with them during the day. So they actually got the photos of those handlers and they just put them into the mix. So a random photo that the sheep has never seen before and another photo of the handler. And as you'll see here, as the sheep wanders in, it recognises its handler and it goes straight to that point to get its feed. Sheep can recognise people that they've seen before. They can recognise faces on different angles. They can understand who people are. So for us in our business, does that mean actually that they can recognise the people who do the good things and the people who do the bad things? Now, I think we don't really fully understand that, that we don't know that answer, but I think that bit of research shows that it is something. Sheep aren't stupid. They're just a bit misunderstood. So what we want to look at, when I was given the opportunity to speak up here for you, and MSD, the Coopers guys, said, we don't want you to talk about our products, which is great. Now, they happen to have a couple of products which I will mention on the way through because they're the only ones who have that, and it's something that I recommend to my clients. So you will see a couple of their logos that come up throughout today. But what we decided to do was I just wanted to unpack all of what I would call the secrets, the things that the really good producers are doing that perhaps everyone isn't doing. And then beyond that, some of the things that even the really good producers probably aren't pausing for long enough to understand why it happens. So that's what we want to unpack as we go through. We want to unveil some of these secrets. So it started with me stopping and thinking, because I'm pretty fortunate. I deal with a group of producers that are achieving some fairly amazing things. And we started looking at what's the difference? What makes the difference between an exceptional producer versus everyone else? And the one thing that I've come up with, the one thing that I've learned out of all this, is that it's mindset, not skills. They don't know more than you necessarily. It's the way that they apply it. So it's mindset, not skills. The other thing is that timing is everything. Actually getting things done on time, being proactive, being slightly ahead of the game makes a hell of a difference to the way that the enterprise actually performs. And more than anything, it's attention to detail. So that's why I want to focus on today, just pausing, slowing down, actually looking at some of these things. Now, one thing that I hate in any of your enterprises is surprises. I don't want surprises in your enterprise. If we've got too many surprises happening all the time, then we haven't been able to forecast and look at what's happening well enough. So we are avoiding as many surprises as we possibly can, and so that's part of what we want to look at. So when I was putting this together, I thought, why don't we just follow the production cycle? Let's actually look at what people are doing at different stages throughout the production cycle. So we're going to start, our first secret that we're going to look at is the secret in the sack. Now, what we're talking about here is the problem I see with a lot of our industry, and hopefully it's not too many of you in this room, but when we're checking rams, generally it's at about 70 k's an hour up the driveway. And it happens in all reality because the rams are in a ram paddock that's pretty close to home. So as long as all four legs are pointing towards the ground, we're pretty comfortable. The rams are okay. That's not how we check rams. It can't be how we check rams. Every commercial producer in this room, in our industry, has to get their hands on their rams. So if you've never done it before, if you've never actually checked, so normally we talk about the 5 T's, I just want to focus on actually physically checking testicles. Now, I'm going to give you a very brief anatomy lesson. Normally I have a little model that I bring with me. Unfortunately, it's built out of beer cans and golf balls, and it looks a bit like a pipe bomb. So getting it on a plane to bring it over here was not going to be terribly successful. But if you've never actually physically inspected the testicles of your rams, then this is one thing I want you to go home after today and absolutely do. All we're feeling for, in terms of the anatomy lesson, is you start at the top and you work your way down. You get to the head of the epididymis, it feels about the size of half a golf ball. You work your way down the body of the testicles, it's about the size of 2 beer cans. And you get to the bottom, you get to the tail of the epididymis, again, it's about the size of half a golf ball. If you can imagine that while you're actually checking the testicles of your rams, then you can do a ram inspection. Now, we're never going to do it quite as well as what a vet's going to do, but if you start to find a few things, that's when you absolutely get a vet involved. If you're not confident, get a vet involved to do your inspection. I'm not a vet, but I will go through some of my clients' rams, and on average, we pull out 17% of rams with faults in testicles. How can we possibly get a joining right if we've got 17% of our rams that have got an issue? So if you aren't putting your hands on the testicles of your rams and actually checking them, then we need to start doing it. The next thing that I thought about in this whole space is my recommendations in terms of joining percentages have changed. So historically, we were always running with the 1% plus 1. That was a great rule of thumb that's been used around industry. The problem with it is that it depends on your mob size. So if we're going into really big mobs and our plus 1 gets diluted too much, then it's having an effect on our joining percentages. If we've got our U's travelling exactly as we want them, which we'll talk about as the morning goes on, then we need the rams in there to be able to capture all of those while they're cycling. So these are the sort of recommendations that we use now. So 1.5% for our mature ewes, 2% for our 1.5-year-old maidens, and 3% for ewe lambs. I didn't dream of that 10 years ago, that we would be using that many rams. And if you stop and you pause and you think about why this is necessary, a mature ewe is available to the ram for about 24 hours. If we go into 1.5-year-old maiden, she's only available to the ram for about 18 hours or thereabouts. And if we get into a ewe lamb, she's only available to the ram for about 12 hours. Now also think about the fact that your ewe lamb and your maidens in general are walking around that paddock completely oblivious to what's going on. They're not doing any of the work. They're not cycling. They're not like this ewe that goes and actually hunts out the rams. The mature ewes do some of the work for us. Our maidens are wandering around oblivious and they're not available to the ram for as long, so we need more rams in there. Particularly on that ewe lamb front, it's one of the major changes that's improved our conception rates. So it's something that we need to focus on. We also need to think about the right rams. Now, I could spend hours talking about how we select rams and what sort of genetics. The only comment I wanted to make on this front is that we need to buy the right rams, and it frustrates the hell out of me that our industry got caught up in this argument between visual and physical inspections and visual assessment and numbers. This should never have been an argument. It should never have even been a discussion. We can't have rams that we haven't made sure are structurally sound. There's no point having the most amazing figures in the world if the bloody thing can't walk or it breaks down after 12 months. At the same time, we know ASBVs give us the best prediction of future performance. And it's not perfect, but it is the best prediction we can get. So why the hell wouldn't we use it? Our industry just got caught up in an argument of us versus them, and it was entirely unnecessary. It's not one or the other, it's both. So when we start talking about rams and how we prepare them, it's a pretty simple recipe. We don't overcomplicate it. All we need to do is physical inspections. Make sure they're actually fit, healthy, going to be able to go out there. If you've got limping rams, you're going to have a higher dry rate. If we've got problems in testicles, you're going to have a higher dry rate. So let's make sure they're physically fit and ready to go. Fit, not fat, particularly well, basically once we get outside of merinos, we are at risk of the rest of them being too fat at joining. So we want to try and aim for those ideal condition scores, because the fatter your rams are coming into joining, when I'm talking over fat, so 4+, which there are a lot of rams around there, we're much more likely to break down in the feet. So let's actually set ourselves up for success. Appropriate joining percentages, we've all banged on in the industry about how long we need to join for, but again, 2 cycles, 35 days, that's all we need. Don't overcomplicate it with long joinings, it's just going to make your life harder. And then understand your genetics. The one thing I'd say about rams is we get one chance every year. Why are we stuffing around with it? Why would we risk putting rams out there that aren't going to do the job for us? So moving on to the next part. How do we get more fetuses on board? Now I'm going to show you some graphs, and throughout today I'm going to show you some of the old graphs that have come out of lifetime wool, and you will have seen if you've done lifetime ewe management. I'm just going to put a slightly different spin on them in the way that we talk about them. So don't be disheartened if you're seeing something you've seen 1,000 times before. I just want to talk about what sits behind it. So we know the easiest way to get more fetuses on board, and this is obviously merino data because it's out of the lifetime wool data, but it's the same for all sheep. If we want to get more fetuses on board, we know higher condition score gives us less dries, less singles, and more twins and triplets. It's not rocket science. Higher condition score, that's going to give us a higher load of fetuses. But do we stop and think about why? The whole reason that this happens is, and for us in terms of managing sheep, this isn't complicated. All we need is for all of the internal feedback mechanisms for that ewe to be telling her life is great. Everything is travelling really well. That's what gets her to ovulate. So if she's in the right condition score and she's getting appropriate nutrition, every internal feedback mechanism is telling her life's pretty good. That's all we need to create for her. So in terms of what we recommend with my clients, we've got a really simple strategy for joining in terms of how we get our ewes right for joining. Have them in the right condition score, and then promise me they can't possibly be going backwards. So we're not chasing any rapid rising plane of nutrition or any of those sorts of things. It's just guarantee me they're not going backwards. Because what happens if she's going backwards at that point when the rams go in? All of her internal feedback mechanisms start to change their message. It starts to tell her things aren't as good as we thought they were going to be. So the first thing she's going to do is not ovulate at the same rate. If we push it too hard, then she's not going to ovulate at all. So why give ourselves that risk? Just promise me they can't possibly be going backwards. Now, one of my favourite acronyms that I use with all of my clients, there's a couple of clients in the room who've seen this before, FTFT. It solves literally 90% of your problems in your enterprise, if you can just remember FTFT. Feed the fucking things and most of your problems go away. From a joining point of view, from an animal health point of view, it solves most of our problems. Because if we've got a happy, healthy animal who has a happy, functioning immune system, then we don't suffer all of those same problems. So it's a really simple concept, but FT. If you don't remember anything else, you might remember that one. So in terms of what we can do in slowing down, if we're going to get to this point of joining, and we've got our scanning results, I'll talk more about scanning, but we have to review them. So with all of my clients, that's my favourite, apart from after the lamb marking, it's one of my favourite days is we know what we've actually achieved, we know what we've got set up in front of us. As soon as we get scanning results, I want you to sit and actually analyse them. I don't care whether you do it with someone like me or whether you do it yourself, sit and review them. And you can learn so much from your scanning results. So let's look at what we start with. If we've got a dry percentage, that's the first number I look at. What's our dry percentage? If our dry percentage is a bit higher, then I want to know if it's most likely a ram issue or most likely a ewe issue. And the way I determine that is straight away I go to what's my twin single triplet ratio. If my twin single triplet ratio is where I expect it to be and as high as I wanted it to be, but my dry rate is higher, then it tells me my ewes were travelling really well, there's a problem in my rams. If my twin single triplet ratio is lower than I would like it to be, I haven't got as many twins and triplets as I would like, then it tells me that the ewes weren't travelling that well and the water's a bit murkier. We need to dig into it more. Now, what does that look like? How can I end up with a high dry rate, and what does it tell me? Sometimes we will see a really great twin single triplet ratio. We've ended up with the sort of big numbers that we were hoping for in terms of that split, but we've still got a high dry rate. We start looking for ram issues, but the rams were all healthy. And then we start looking at what the joining conditions were, and particularly in mixed farming operations, if they've gone out onto stubbles and they're joined over multiple paddocks with gates open, sometimes the ram just wasn't in the same paddock as the ewes. So we start unpacking what this actually looks like. So just take the time to actually review. And then the other one, even if you're not actually scanning for early and late, just ask your scanner. What was the split? What did the split look like? Roughly, what is it? Because if everything's travelling well, then we will have the majority of them join on the first cycle. And to put that into context, one of our clients this year, his ewes were travelling exceptionally well. He does a 3-week joining. He has a split. It's a bit complicated. I don't recommend it for everyone. But in that 3-week joining, 95% of his ewes got in lamb. So it shows that when things are travelling well, and that also backs up the fact that we don't need more than 2 cycles. We should be getting the vast majority, so I'm talking 80% plus on that first cycle, and we only have a second cycle to try and mop up the rest. A third cycle shouldn't be necessary. But on top of all of that, the clear message that we have to send to industry is don't add fetuses if you're not willing to do the work. There is absolutely no point in us loading ewes up with fetuses if we're not going to put the work in to actually keep them alive. And so that's where we head now, because there is still so much opportunity. Despite the great gains that we've been making, there's still so much opportunity for us to understand what's happening. Now again, you will have seen this plenty of times before, and you will have heard Jason Tromp and most of us in the industry say, if you're not scanning, you're not really trying. That's pretty harsh, but my life would be a lot easier if we could actually just fully comprehend, if everyone could fully comprehend just how big the difference is between our singles and twins. So, just to throw a graph up here very briefly. This is 2 different lines. We've got singles versus twins. There's a clear breakaway that happens in late pregnancy where our twins need more energy. But once we hit lactation, that gap comes even greater. So a twin-bearing ewe at peak lactation needs 3 times the energy that she needed when she was dry. It's an enormous difference. She needs a hell of a lot more than what her single mate needs. Now, our problem as an industry, and the reason this has been so difficult to get people to actually properly differentially manage their singles and twins, is that they all look like sheep. My life would be so much easier if our singles look like sheep and our twins look like cows, because we would actually manage them differently. But that's how big the difference is between singles and twins. As soon as we get that conception information, as soon as we get a scanning result, we have to treat them as different animals because they are entirely different animals. Their requirements are so different. So let's give her a chance. So that's our starting point. So even if you are, and I imagine anyone who's here is most likely scanning for twins and possibly triplets, is there more we can do to differentially manage them? Can we actually just put a bit more effort into our twins? That's the main message I want to get for you. And that gets us to the point of actually lambing. So we want to look at what that secret life is that happens beyond that. So we've got our fetuses on board. I threw in a slide here about ewe lambs because we often get questions, and for some of you who chose to be in here, you're not going to get to hear what Jason Tromp says in the next room. And I just wanted to briefly touch on ewe lambs. First of all, the one thing that I've learnt, the overriding message I've got for you about ewe lambs with now quite a few years of joining ewe lambs with clients, is that ewe lambs are fickle and highly unpredictable. So this year across my client base, we're in flocks where we got everything right, and I mean literally everything right, we got okay results. And then I've got another client who threw a ram in with some ewe lambs just because he thought he might as well, and he got an exceptional result. And that frustrates the shit out of me. And they're a fickle animal. The one thing that I can tell you, the things that tend to give us that trend towards better results, joining weight, obviously you've all heard that plenty of times, but we are looking for 45 kilos or 70% of the standard reference weight. So if you've got really big ewes, then you need your ewe lambs to be higher in weight at that point of joining. The other thing I would add to that is we need them to get there before joining, not right at the point of joining. If we're targeting a weight, it's not just chasing our tail right to the very end. The earlier you can get them to a higher weight, the better your results will be. Age is important, so we know the older they are, the better the result's going to be, but that's the greatest challenge, is because if we allow them to be 8 months old or 9 months old, then it stuffs next year. So let's not compromise next year in chasing what we're doing. Nutrition, I've already mentioned that. You'll quickly understand it. I think that's fairly important. Growth throughout pregnancy is also really important. So if you just pause for a second and think about what's happening, we get a ewe lamb pregnant at 45 kilos, then you get to lambing. If we were to weigh her again right at the point of lambing and she's 50 kilos, has she grown? She can't have. We've loaded up with lamb, amniotic fluid, placenta. So all she's actually done is add that. We need her to keep growing through that process if we want to get good results and good lamb survival. Because actually, if she's at the same weight at lambing as what she was at joining, she's gone backwards, not forwards. So we need to understand how important that is on the way through. I mentioned ram percentage earlier. And then the other one is, and this is where I get to give one of their products a plug, but we know that CampiVac is an important component of our ewe lamb joining. So across my clients, it's something that we just have a blanket recommendation for ewe lambs. Because this is a photo from one of my clients' places the other day. So not what we want to be seeing, a slipped fetus. The problem with slipped fetuses is it's a bit like dropping your phone in the paddock. It's pretty hard to find. So if you ever find an aborted fetus, pick it up and get it tested. Because we want to know what's happening. And this doesn't matter whether we're talking about ewe lambs or mature ewes. We need to understand why we're getting abortions. Now, people overestimate how many of our lambs that disappear are from abortions. If we've got a problem, then yes, it can be quite a lot. But the reality is the majority of our lambs die post-birth. So what can cause an abortion? Campylobacter, as we talked about, that's where CampiVac actually fits in. But it could just as easily be toxoplasmosis, listeria, any of the stresses, so physical or nutritional stress, and then there's others where we actually just never actually find out why. So actually do the work to understand. If we're seeing slipped fetuses, let's understand why. But certainly from a ewe lamb point of view, that's where CampiVac fits in. It's one thing that we can, out of all of those potential abortive causes, CampiVac is the only one we can do a proactive measure against. Campylobacter with CampiVac. So, the recommendations, I just want to touch on this briefly because there is sometimes a bit of confusion. My main message is, if you're using CampiVac, we want 2 doses 4 weeks apart before joining. We don't need to complicate it anymore. For some people, they're doing one as rams go in and one as rams come out, which happens to be just 5 weeks apart. That works fine. It's still got you outside of the main risk period, so that can work fine. You'll also see that there's a recommendation that there's an annual booster. Now, personally, we don't use the annual booster because most of it, once we get beyond the maiden stage, they've got natural exposure to Campylobacter anyway. But if we're in a high-risk environment, like we're using a lot of containment feeding, where we've got a lot of animal contact, there is the higher risk. So if we have a property where we're seeing severe or regular issues with Campylobacter, then it becomes something that you might consider. It's the one thing, as I say, from a preventative point of view when it comes to abortive causes, it's the one thing that we can actually do something about. And while we're on that, I just need to throw this in because I still don't think we've quite got this understood across enough of our industry. It's how vaccines actually work. And that is, we know with a vaccine, if we do a pre-lambing dose, we get some antibodies passed over to the lamb. Everyone's quite aware of that. That's the whole reason we do pre-lambing vaccinations. And then that first vaccine that we give at lamb marking gives this tiny, tiny, tiny little spike. it gives us a little bit of coverage. If we don't do that follow-up dose, you might as well have just tipped it out on the ground, because it's the second dose that does the majority of the work for us in terms of an antibody response, in terms of immune system response. So if we're going to use vaccines, let's use them properly and make sure that we are. So there are still so many in the industry that do a vaccine at landmarking and don't do a follow-up vaccine. It's a waste of time. Vaccines are great, cheap insurance, especially while the animals stand there in front of us, so let's actually just use them properly. All right, we're going to go into the lambing paddock and look at what's secretly happening inside of our lambing paddock. Now, it's not a secret, actually, but people constantly say to me, this is the most asked question that I get: why are my lambs dying? You shouldn't have to ask me why your lambs are dying. You shouldn't have to ask anyone else why your lambs are dying. We've had this information for an exceptionally long time now. We know that there is this relationship between condition score at lambing and lamb birth weight. Really well proven. The higher the condition score, the higher our birth weights. And the reason that that's important to us is we know that there's this relationship between birth weight and survival. So as long as we have this graph available to us, no one needs to ask me why my lambs are dying. We're targeting this really specific range, 4.5 to 5.5 kilos. Doesn't matter what breed we're talking about, this is when the lamb is physically capable of surviving. So to put this into perspective, if I had a house brick and a piece of paper and we warm them up in front of the fire and then we take them out into the cold night air, we know what happens. The piece of paper cools down straight away because it's got this big surface area, not enough volume. It can't retain its own body heat. The house brick has enough volume, it can retain its own body weight, its own temperature. It can thermoregulate. So this is what we need to be thinking about. Our piece of paper is these guys down the bottom end. Our lambs that are under 4.5 kilos. That is the majority of lambs that are dying in our paddocks. That's the piece of paper. They've got this big skin area. They just can't retain their body weight well enough. And then out the other end, we've got, so this is above the 5.5, particularly above 6 kilos, we've got these lambs that are suffering traumatic births. Now, my best example of them, who here in this room has ever had a pet lamb? You can admit to it. We all have. We've all had it at some stage. Now, these guys out this end, they're your classic pet lamb. Now, we generally end up with a pet lamb because it's a nice big lamb and we look at it and we think, shit, why isn't anyone looking after this lamb? So we pick it up and we take it home, and then you pin it between your legs and with 2 hands and a bottle, you try and make it drink. And over time, you eventually get it to drink. It doesn't suck properly, and then it's weird for the rest of its life. That's pet lambs. Have we paused to think about why? Why are they weird for the rest of their life? They sometimes think they're the dog, that's conditioning. There's all sorts of things that happen. But the reality is a lot of them have got subclinical brain damage. That's why they hadn't mothered up. So we've all had that pet lamb. We haven't paused to understand why. So if you were to actually weigh it, you would understand why. If you don't weigh, you don't know. So this is my single best piece of ag tech for you. A $10 set of luggage scales. You should have them with you every lambing. I'm not telling you to run around and actually chase lambs and catch them and weigh them. I'm saying if you pull a lamb, weigh it. If you find a dead lamb, pick it up and weigh it. You go back to that graph, you look at what weights they are. You don't need me to tell you why your lambs are dying. We can clearly see why. So as soon as anyone starts writing down lamb weights and they start reading them out to me, it'll be 3 kilos, 3.5 kilos, 3.8 kilos, 4.1 kilos. Might get a bad weather event, it's 4.3 kilos. They're not picking up 4.5 to 5.5 kilo lambs. And if they are, then we start asking questions. If we've got perfect health lambs, then we start asking why are they dying. Is it a disease issue? Most likely it's actually mismothering that we'll talk about in a minute. But it's pretty simple. If you want to know why your lambs are dying, let's rule the first things out by weighing them. The other one that amazes me is that I can still walk into rooms like this and I can show this photo and say, why is that lamb golden? And there's still not enough people that know why that lamb is golden. That lamb is golden because it has passed meconium in the birthing process. Meconium is the first poo of that lamb. It only happens when it's in fetal stress. It's exactly the same as human babies. If the doctors see meconium in the birthing process, they got to get that baby out. It's gone into fetal stress. That's exactly what is happening here. Now this example behind me is a ewe lamb. That first lamb is the cleaner looking one, and it's taken her a while to get that lamb out. The second lamb's gone into fetal stress. if we're seeing heaps of golden lambs, then we actually can straight away know that we've got some traumatic births happening in our paddocks. And we need to start understanding why. Now, there's a bunch of reasons why it could be. It could be too high a birth weight. There could be problems with the ewes, all sorts of things. But if we're seeing it, let's actually start looking for what's happening and start investigating so that we can make next year better. And while we're talking about that subclinical birth trauma or the subclinical dystocia, when we think about it, we think about the lambs that we pull. But there's a whole bunch of lambs that we don't pull. She eventually gets it out, but there has been this pressure in the birth canal, slight bleed on the brain, and that lamb, the classic pet lamb that we talked about, isn't viable. And sometimes we actually look and we see you walk away from what we think is a perfectly healthy lamb, and you push her back on there and she walks away from it. And you push her back on there and she walks away from it. And we wonder, what's she doing? My question is, does she know more than what we think she does? Does she know more than us? Now, there is some work that was done, and there is a theory, and it hasn't been, it's difficult to try and prove, but the theory is that a lamb who has had that subclinical birth trauma, subclinical dystocia, small bleed on the brain, changes its vocalization. It doesn't bleat the same way. It doesn't bleat at the same rate. It's not potentially at the same pitch. And so that ewe knows that lamb's not viable. And we look and we think, silly bitch, why is she walking away? And all we do is get frustrated, and out come those words again. Stupid sheep. Sheep are stupid. What are you doing? They're not stupid. They're just a bit misunderstood. So maybe she knows more than we do. And that takes us to the next step, which is within our lambing paddocks. What's hiding within our lambing paddocks? And what are we doing? Now, we set up a paddock like this. We've got great shelter, and we've done all the work, and we've planted all of these trees so that the sheep can use them. Where do the sheep go to lamb? Usually somewhere like that, isn't it? No matter how much money we've tipped into shelter and how much we've spent, she goes and puts herself on the point of the hill. And once again, we look at it and we say, what the hell is she doing out there? It's horrendous weather. She's put herself on the point of the hill. It's not because she's dumb. She is hardwired over evolution to avoid predators. What comes from shelter? Predators. She's not going to go and park herself in against the trees. I actually get really concerned when I see sheep seeking shelter, because that tells me she's not comfortable. So our job with shelter is to drop wind speed across paddocks. So wherever she is, she has better conditions to deal with. But if she's actually actively seeking shelter, then I start to get concerned. I want her to go to wherever she's most comfortable to lamb. The point of the hill gives her her best vantage point, to be able to look around, to be able to see danger, to be able to see predators. We just need to create that vantage point as a nice, comfortable environment for her to lamb. So that's how we can drop wind speed. Again, not stupid, just a bit misunderstood. And part of that for us is to understand that these things are a prey animal. So evolution has told them they need to do everything they can to keep themselves alive. Now, we've heard on the main stage over the last couple of days, they all spend their time trying to die. It's not quite true. There are a lot of things that will kill them and a lot of things that will eat them. So we know the obvious things around predators. I want to take that step a little bit further, and for us to just pause and think about the fact that we're actually creating a predator situation for them. So we have trained predators, don't we, on our farms. We spend 11 months of the year teaching sheep to run away from dogs, to run away from them. And then we get to lambing, and I see people driving around lambing paddocks with dogs on the back of the ute, dogs on the back of the side-by-side, dogs on the bike, and yeah, just in case we need to catch a ewe, we need to take the dogs with us. It's a predator. Sheep are a prey animal. Keep the bloody dogs away from your lambing paddocks. All it's going to invoke is a stress response in an animal that we need to stay on her birth site for 6 hours uninterrupted. It takes 6 hours for her to form that really strong maternal bond with her lambs, uninterrupted, no one interfering with it. So we can't afford to have anything in the paddock. There's more trained predators though. There's us. We're an apex predator. Sheep are scared of us. So that begs the question, and I hear people say all the time, oh, our sheep don't mind us driving through. They get used to us driving through at lambing. Sheep actually hate you driving through. They hate you driving through. So the question is, in this whole space, how can we give them 6 hours uninterrupted on their birth site? Why are we even checking ewes? This is a little bit controversial, and I'm not telling you to leave your ewes and to disregard your requirement to provide adequate welfare. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm asking, though, is, are we checking ewes for her or for us? So why do we start with maximum disturbance at lambing? We get to lambing and we start driving around our ewes every day. Some people are doing it twice a day. And it's in case there's a problem. Why are we doing it just in case? Why don't we start every third day? And then if we start to see some problems, then we we change our strategy. Why do we start with maximum disruption? And I can tell you why. It's the hardest habit for me to change in my clients. But the reason we do it is for us. It makes us feel better. We know it interrupts them on the birth site. It's well proven that every time we go near a paddock, it causes more problems. So when we know that's a fact, why are we turning up just in case there's a problem? It's something that I think we need to change in the way we think about things. We know mob size, and I'm not going to spend any major time on mob size because it's not a secret. We know that mob size is really important in our multiples. All I want you to do is to stop again and pause and think about what it actually looks like. So why all the talk about mob size? The whole concept, the science that sits behind it is a ewe, before she goes into her own active labour, her hormones kick in, she starts looking for the smell of afterbirth. Brilliant biological system. It means as soon as she drops a lamb, she's already pinging, looking for the smell of afterbirth. She turns around, she cleans it. Works brilliantly in singles and in really small mobs. Where we run into trouble is when we've got multiples. And it's the time between first and second lamb, second and third lamb. That gives an opportunity for another ewe to come in who's looking for the smell of afterbirth, hasn't had her own lambs yet. She comes onto the birth site, she starts trying to clean lambs that aren't hers because that desire to find afterbirth is so strong. So all she does is immediately start looking for it, and she'll go to every birth site she can find in that paddock and she'll try and clean lambs. Our job is to give her less birth sites to find. Because she'll go onto that birth site, she'll clean a lamb that's not hers, and then she will take those lambs, and then she goes into her own active labour, and she'll butt those lambs away. And now we've got our perfect 4.5 to 5.5 kilo lamb that was great, healthy, we've done everything right, it doesn't have anyone feeding it. Mob size is a simple concept. And people say, oh, I don't have the paddocks, or I can't find a way. Now, if we're in a high rainfall area, we use really simple temporary electric fencing. We create an opportunity to get mob size down and keep stocking rates up. I don't particularly care how you go about it. In singles, I don't care how big your mobs are, because the ewe drops a lamb, she turns around, she cleans it. So you can, if you've got a paddock that's big enough to take all of your singles and that frees up paddock for twins, do it. I don't particularly care how you go about it. All I'm saying is we know the science says smaller mobs get to small lambs. So let's find a way to actually do it. Let's give her a chance. And ultimately, in that whole space, how many lambings have we even got left in us? How many more can we stuff up? How many more can we miss the opportunity to learn? We have a limited number of lambings. Once we've got live lambs on the ground, we need to start thinking about how we can influence them. So this is I think, a really underutilised thing. Now, you've all heard about imprinting. We know what the idea of imprinting is. Now, I think this is the best, most amazing piece of research just to show us how important imprinting is. So, lambs were exposed to wheat for 5 hours at 6 weeks of age. Half of them saw it with mum. The other half were drafted off and saw it on their own. And then they didn't see wheat for 2.5 years. When they saw wheat for the first time after 2.5 years, those who had seen it on their own only ate 50 grams of wheat. Those who had seen it with mum ate 360 grams of wheat. Now, they probably died of acidosis. But don't get too hung up on that. The concept is, if mum does it, it must be safe. That's what it shows us. This brilliant piece of research, great, amazing new research, 1984. We know if mum does it, it must be safe. If you want it to eat a certain type of feed, if you want it to eat from a certain type of feeder, if you want it to walk into a shed, if you want it to go through your yards, walk through a gateway, show them with mum. If mum does it, it must be safe. And while we're on the topic of weaning, and leading into weaning. Imprinting we're going to do in the lead up to weaning, so we set our animal up. What we want to think about is how are we actually managing our weanings? Now what we tend to do is we run ewes and lambs in, we draft the lambs off, and then we send them that way and we send the ewes this way. Have we ever stopped to think about the fact that there is no mob dynamic inside that mob of lambs? Every one of those lambs has always been a follower, never a leader. Everywhere they've gone, they've had a leader in front of them. So we let them out as a mob of lambs, and there is no leaders. And so the lead changes the whole time. If we put a drone over the top, you'd see the lead changes the whole time. And so while everyone's following, they just run. And they run until they hit a fence, and then they turn right, and then they run until they hit another fence. And if your fences are good enough, they'll just keep turning right, and they'll wear a track around your paddock. What if we actually just paused for a bit and gave them time to figure out their mob dynamic? So this is a client of mine, Will Hanson, from a few years ago. He was actually doing yard weaning. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all get hooked into yard weaning. These lambs have been in the yards for only 12 hours. He was feeding some grain in little troughs, which is why they're following. But you can see the 3 leaders there already. That's 12 hours of that mob sitting in the yards so that they could figure out who the leaders were. There's 3 or 4 lambs there that have become the leaders. Let's actually just give them an opportunity to do that. Again, sheep aren't stupid. They're just a bit misunderstood. Now, I've talked at you fairly hard for this first opening part of this session. What I'm actually going to do is give you a couple of minutes here. What I want you to do, in a room like this, you need to surround yourself with great people. Now, one of the things that is brilliant about being in a place like this is the fact if we surround ourselves with 5 great sheep producers, you become the 6th. If you surround yourself with 5 poor sheep producers, you'll become the 6th. So as you're sitting here in the room, I'm going to give you a break for 2 or 3 minutes. I want you to actually find someone who's either in front of you, behind you, or beside you that you don't know. I want you to pull your phone out briefly and show them something. You'll have a photo of your farm on your phone, or a photo of something, if you're not from a farm, a photo of something that you're proud of. I want you to meet someone who's in this room. So it's going to take me a little bit to wrangle you back. So if I'm standing here with my hand up, that means shut up. Okay? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes, very briefly, meet someone who's around you. Go for it. If you haven't seen my hand up yet, my hand is up. All right, it's only 2 minutes. Hopefully, though, what you've just done is started a conversation that you can continue on when we walk back out of these doors. One more person that you've met. If you're in this environment, make the most of it. Meet the great people that are around you rather than just talking to all of the same people that you already know. Right, we're going to just quickly now change gears a little bit, and we're going to head into a slightly different area from here. And I just want to focus on what our industry looks like, what we can do now. From an industry point of view, there's a word that gets thrown around a lot, which is biosecurity. It's a bit of a rubbish government term that doesn't mean a hell of a lot to the rest of us. It shouldn't ever be regarded as biosecurity, because for you, all of you, no matter what, whether you're on farm, whether you're a service provider like myself, it's not about biosecurity, it's about business security. And what does that mean for us? Now, for those on farm, it is our job to keep things out. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to whip through this part pretty quickly. But we should all have a true quarantine procedure. So the really basic things around that. If we've got new stock coming onto our place, quarantine drench, as many actives as possible. So we should be trying to use 4 actives so that we can do what we can to keep out drench resistance. Vaccinate, because we don't really know what the vaccination history is of those animals. And actually hold them in yards. I'm just saying, set yourself up with a process. It should be things like releasing them into a paddock with a worm burden. Actually doing a fecal egg count 14 days later to see whether our drenches were effective and whether we've got any issues there that we need to worry about. And keeping them separate. Now, the keeping them separate part is the hardest part and the thing that we don't do terribly well. But one of the biggest reasons we should be trying to keep them separate is because right at the moment, I would say across my client base, at least 70% of them have had lice in the last 3 years. And it is driving me nuts. Now, lice. The reason it's such a problem for us is it takes 5 or 6 months from infestation for us to even know that we've really got a problem. And so that makes it hard for us to retrace our steps and figure out where it's come from, which becomes a problem for us. It requires direct sheep-to-sheep contact, and the one that we always hear about is it has an effect on our fleece values. Now, the bit that I want us to get a better understanding in the industry is what effect does it have on the rest of our productivity? Is it having an effect on our growth rates? Is it having an effect on our lamb survival? What are the other effects? But the biggest question I've actually got is, why do we even still have lice? We've had effective products for an awfully long time. Now, the great Ken Solly always says, if you've got one finger pointing at others, you've got 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. So it's something we need to be aware of. Now, we've had effective backlines for a long time. Really great chemicals that have done that are capable of doing a great job. Any of you who have ever backlined sheep will know that occasionally you get one in a race that's not quite in the right spot, but it's all right because we can sort of reach over there and you do that and it stands up and it looks a bit like this. The way backlines work is that they need to translocate, so you need a nice even line down the middle of over the spine so that it can translocate around the body. So when that animal stands up like that and it starts translocating around the body, we've got areas that the chemical misses. And so we get lice survive. Nothing wrong with the chemical. It's just us on the end of the gun that becomes the problem. We also, and I actually had a phone call, a text message while we were sitting down near the main stage yesterday from a client, and he actually said, what happens if someone's backlined ewes and they've got woolly lambs at foot? And the answer is actually really simple. I could have saved him a whole lot of labour and we could have just tipped it out on the ground. Do not backline ewes and have woolly lambs at foot, because the lambs are just going to carry the lice over. But we see it everywhere. He sent me a video as he's driving past, and it's his neighbour, where they're trying to work out who had lice first, and we're pretty sure we know who had lice first, the person who's just done that. So this is the problem. Now, again, to give a plug to a product, but this is a game changer. FlexHolt coming into the market changes the way we deal with lice. It's a simple drench product, any length wool, so that's the exciting part for me, is that we can actually essentially wait until we know we've got lice. So you think about how we've been using backlines, particularly off shears, we've been using them in case we've got lice, rather than because we've got lice. This gives us an opportunity to actually understand whether or not we've got lice. Lambs down to 6 kilos, so that does allow us to deal with if we've got lambs at foot. We can use it in pregnant ewes and rams at any age, at any stage. So that is a game changer for us. It changes the way we can use lice products. The biggest risk that I see is us. So we need to make sure that we do not underdose. It's not a cheap product. So people are going to try and run close to that line. We should not run close to that line of have we got enough of a dose in there for them. Don't miss muster, and that includes even in the race. So I've personally used this. We got lice ourselves, which is not great as a consultant. We got lice, bought sheep that ended up having lice, so we ended up using it. Now the biggest risk for me was actually trying not to miss a sheep. So my recommendation, where you can use a handler, where every sheep stops in front of you, great. The little crayon that you use, it's definitely makes a difference. I was amazed how much slower I was doing it compared to when I'm just drenching and you don't really care, because you have to make sure you get every other sheep. or every single sheep. The crayon to mark them means that we actually get to see whether we have. Jim, who was your host at the very start of the day, gave me this quote. Research shows that 70% of people who had lice this year will have lice again next year. And that's because we're either not dealing with it properly or it's coming straight back in again. So please slow down. The other one from a biosecurity point of view is to think about the dreaded feet issue. Now, it's a bit of a vexed topic. People don't like talking about it. I actually want to talk about it from a slightly different point of view. So virulent foot rot, yep, causes all sorts of problems. The industry hates it. Everyone wants to have a fight about it generally. Basics around foot rot. You don't want it. You might already have it, particularly benign foot rot, which we all love to call scald because it makes us feel better. You might get it. We know that's quite a risk of some sort. And my thing is actually do something about it. Now, benign foot rot is the one that we actually have the biggest problem, so scald. Aggressive benigns are the one that frustrate me the most. Virulent foot rot, if someone has virulent foot rot, they go into a foot program, we get rid of it, the problem's solved. Aggressive benigns, where we get the right seasonal conditions and they actually crucify us because we end up with hoppy lambs, they hurt our growth rates, ewes are breaking down in the feet, but we can't get rid of it because it doesn't express itself all the time, so a foot program doesn't get rid of it. I think we can make more strategic use of foot vax. Now, the company doesn't even talk about it, so they didn't really necessarily want me talking about it because it's a bit, depending on what state we're standing in and who says what about foot rot and where people think. I just think from a benign foot rot point of view, for those people that are dealing with scald, if we've got a season where the conditions are setting us up where we're at a higher risk and we think that the vaccine has the potential to help us, it's something we should consider. So if anyone's having that problem, have a chat to Jim or one of the other people to actually see whether it might play a role. I just think we're underutilising it. There is a bigger secret, though, that's worse from a biosecurity point of view than foot rot. And the only reason I'm going to talk about this one, and some of you may have seen me talk about this before, but I want to talk about it because as an industry, there's still this shit fight that's going on about EID being brought in and why they bring it in. I just want to touch on why and why this is so important to our industry. So foot and mouth disease. You need to understand how it works and what it looks like. The most likely way that foot and mouth disease gets into our country is through food products. And someone feeds those scraps to pigs. That's the main mechanism that foot and mouth disease spread happens. The reason pigs are so important is they produce a plume of the virus, they're mass producers, and it can travel up to 10 kilometres on the wind. Now, if that happens to land where we've got other livestock, then sheep are a major problem for us because sheep don't show any clinical signs of foot and mouth disease. They can walk around oblivious. We wouldn't have any idea. We can have infected sheep and not actually see anything. Unlike pigs where we get deaths and cows that get a massive spike in temperature and you'll see them standing in dams doing weird things, sheep don't show much at all. Now, our best example of what a foot and mouth disease outbreak in Australia would look like comes out of the UK's 2001 outbreak. That was caused by 16 sheep. A guy fed products to his pigs that were infected with foot and mouth disease. The pigs mass-produced the virus. It infected sheep on his property, and he sent 16 sheep into a sale yards. And that started the 2001 outbreak. That 2001 outbreak required more than 10,000 vets, soldiers, and field staff to try and contain, control, and eradicate. This graphic in the middle shows you what the outbreak actually looked like by month as it plays through. There was 4.2 million animals that were slaughtered in the control program and 2.3 million animals that were slaughtered for welfare purposes. For some reason that's not actually working, that graphic. Anyway, there was nice dots that show up on there that show you how it happened across the time. The 6 million animals that were killed over that whole process, it's important to understand that breakdown. 4.2 million animals were in actually controlling, eradicating the disease. The 2.3 were animals that just had nowhere to go because this is what happened to livestock prices. There was nearly 12 months where there was no price. That was caused by 16 sheep. So every time you hear the industry say, a foot and mouth disease outbreak, it could cost us $50 billion. A small proportion of that is the money that's spent controlling it. The majority of that money comes from the loss of export markets. And that comes out of all of our pockets. It's not money being spent by the government to try and control and eradicate the disease. Now, what does foot and mouth disease look like? Most people will show you photos like this. This is what foot and mouth disease looks like. Lesions in the mouth, lesions between the toes. That's not what foot and mouth disease looks like to me. This is what foot and mouth disease looks like. Now, in the UK, in 2001, they started trying to burn all of those carcasses. They could not find enough timber to keep those fires going. They ended up digging pits like these. This one's a photo from Charles Milne, who, in the Scottish outbreak, he was the chief veterinary officer at the time. They bought this forest. They felled the forest area. They dug the first pits inside 24 hours of the first confirmed case. They have to line them so that it doesn't, the mass breakdown of all of those carcasses doesn't infect or doesn't cause problems with the groundwater. All of that caused by 16 sheep. And every expert that I talk to about foot and mouth disease says it's not if we get it, it's when we get it. The most important part to understand is if we get a confirmed case, so let's say there's a confirmed case and it's here, the way that our industry deals with it is that we have a national standstill. No livestock can move. Anything that's on a truck can go to its destination, everything else stops exactly where it is until we give the all clear. Now, that's a challenge for all of us. You imagine a big sale yards day, 60,000 lambs there, and we get the confirmed case, they can't move. They have to stay there. Now, one of the things in that whole UK outbreak was when I looked at it, I thought, the reason it actually happened was some of those sheep went into a sale yards and then they went straight to another sale yards. And so this spread happened across the UK quite rapidly. And I thought, well, at least we don't really do that. That was until we started to actually properly understand the secret travels of sheep. And I saw this first graphic. And this shows movements in and out of sale yards on one day. It's not even a big sale yard day. But look how many of those lines go straight from one sale yards to another one. And the reason is we use them as depots. We drop sheep, put together a load, send them somewhere else. We drop cattle, we put together a load, we take them somewhere else. Now, I just want to show you what this looks like. Now, I'm pretty lucky because of some of the work that I've done. AgVic, Ben Fay in particular, provides me with these images to be able to show you what stock movements actually look like and why it's so important. If we've got a foot and mouth disease outbreak, we need to know every sheep that has ever been in contact with those sheep, plus every sheep that's ever been in contact with the sheep that had been in contact with them. Think about unscrambling that egg for a second when you look at these graphs. This is movements into and out of into sale yards for a week in July. This is movements into Victorian abattoirs for a week in July. This is movements to Victorian producers, so this is onto picks. So think about auctions plus sales, those sorts of things, property to property transfers. This is movements out of Victorian sale yards for a week in July. Now you think about July. July's a pretty quiet time for sales. This is combined movements into and out of Victoria for 1 week in July. This is movements of livestock into Victoria for 1 week in November. This one is national sheep movements on the 13th of December 2023. This is national cattle movements on the 13th of December 2023. Now, everyone who tells, all of the experts tell me that we will most likely have foot and mouth disease for a month before it's diagnosed. That's a bloody big egg to unscramble. And we need to do it as quickly as we can because time is everything in that whole process. So how do we do it? It's not rocket science. It's RFID. Now, the RFID, people say, oh, there's lots of technologies, maybe we should be using high frequency, all these sorts of things. The reason it's RFID is because it's really well-proven technology. It's the same thing you use with your credit card to tap and go. It's the same thing that makes it beep if you walk out of a shop with something that hasn't had the tag taken off it. It's the same way you guys have been getting in and out of your hotel rooms over the last couple of days. Well-proven science, well-proven technology. It's the same way your car starts. Now, as an industry, when you look at that egg that we've got to try and unscramble, we say, well, how come we haven't been doing any of this earlier? Is RFID new technology? The first sheep tag was released in 1992. 1992. Now, clearly we've made some big advances in how we can read tags and how we can set things up. One of the biggest was Victoria figuring out how the hell to deal with sale yards. So all this image is here is showing you what the lane readers look like on the draft. So that, because what we've quickly discovered was that the majority of sheep were being drafted anyway in the sale yards. They had to go through. So if they could just put readers on those drafts, as the agents are doing their same normal tasks, we can capture those ear tags as they go through in a normal process. It was a major game changer. But again, it's not rocket science. It's just our way of being able to electronically and rapidly track who's had contact with who. So instead of going out and getting out paper documents and trying to retrace things, knowing full well the majority of us fill out our vendor decks wrong anyway. This takes a lot of the human element out of it. That's why it's so important. And if we're going to have this technology, maybe we should actually use it. Now, I'm not going to spend, some of you will have seen me talk about electronic ID plenty of times. I'm not going to talk about it too much because anyone who saw the tech talks, you've already had that opportunity at this conference. All I want you to think about is we know population dynamics exist in sheep. We know we've got good performers, average performers and poor performers. If we're going to have tags in their ears, why don't we bloody use them? Why don't we actually capture some of that information? Now, the main way I want you to use EID is to stop the mistakes, because we've been making heaps of mistakes in the way that we select and deal with animals. We should only ever be comparing comparable sheep. So a merino example is my easiest one to show you. But if we've got a twin-born merino lamb, we know that, first of all, it's going to be smaller because it's twin-born and hasn't had a great job of being reared. It'll cut you less wool. That science has proven that twins cut a slightly less wool and at a slightly broader micron. So if we're comparing twins against singles, you're going to walk up and the single's going to look bigger and its wool's going to look better. We should only be comparing singles to singles and twins to twins. Only compare comparable sheep. Same thing goes when we're making any of our selection decisions. We've just got to keep it simple. So if you're thinking about using electronic ID in your enterprise, if we're going to have tags anyway, let's look at what we can capture really simply. If you're a merino operation, then the obvious ones, so I want birth status, so we know was it born as a twin or a single, so that we can compare comparable sheep. Record fleece weight and micron, we can do that in the shed really easily. Just ring someone up, they happen to turn up, they have all the gear, and you get fleece weight and micron in real time in your shed. Simple concept, great way to be able to actually understand what our sheep are actually producing and to be able to rank them, to understand that population dynamics. And then record pregnancy status. Again, the sheep are already there, why don't we capture that information? Sometimes it's as simple as actually just running a mob through, and if we're doing something else, we're just capturing their ear tag numbers and we just name the file, twins, 2024. We know who they are. If we need to get to a tight spot, most of my clients have been in a pretty tight spot over this last little while because our season is horrible over where I am. We've got the opportunity to just cull groups of animals that we don't even like because we already know who they are. So it gives us that opportunity. If we're talking a prime lamp operation, there's less levers for us to be able to pull with this because until Ferg gets his technology up or someone finds us a way to match ewes to lambs, life's still a bit difficult for us. But birth status is so easy to record at marking. All we need to do is know the sequence of tags that have gone into different mobs. 1 to 382 went into twins from this particular mob. You just write it down. You don't even need to read tags. Just keep track of which tags go in. And then later on, if we ever need to know and we decide, bugger it, things are tight, the only information we have is who's born as a single, let's bugger all them off, we can do it in an instant. So birth status, we want that. Pregnancy status, because they're already there, we can capture that. And possibly we need to start thinking a bit more about our mature weights. So maybe we should be capturing a 1.5-year-old weight. And then if things get tight, we can decide, right, any ewe who came in as a 1.5-year-old and was above 70 kilos, we're not mucking around with her because she's not efficient enough for us. We can actually apply that selection pressure. The biggest question on this front is if we're culling breeders, we need to be able to differentiate whether it's her fault or ours because we make that mistake a fair bit. I don't want you to think that EID is going to be a silver bullet that's going to make you lots of money because tags don't make you a bloody cent. Decisions make you money, not tags. So people have often said to me, how much can I make out of EID? I haven't got a clue. I can put tags and equipment into two different businesses and they're going to get two entirely different outcomes because decisions make you money, not tags and equipment. But there are opportunities there to make more informed decisions, which is what we should all be seeking. And that brings us to my last secret of all in this whole space, the greatest secret of sheep production. And I think it's the one that we actually really, genuinely get wrong quite often in our industry. And that's the secret around people. People are our most important piece of equipment, our most important piece of technology, our most important asset in our business. And when I say that, I don't just mean staff, because if you're a family farm and you don't have any staff, I'm talking about you, I'm talking about your family members, I'm talking about staff, I'm talking about the team that you surround yourself with. And when I say surround yourself with, it's your agent, it's your agronomist, it's all of the people that you seek information from. The question the challenge that I put to all of you on a people front is show them your vision. You come to a place like this and we get an opportunity to actually get amongst some great people, see some great information, get excited, actually tell your team and the people that you work with where you're trying to get to. What are we trying to achieve in the first place? What is our target? What is our aim? Show them your passion. What actually puts the fire in your belly? Why do we get out of bed in the mornings? This is our opportunity to actually get people on board. Now, the one way we do that is actually invest in them. I'm not talking about money. So yes, you can put them through professional development. You can spend money on investing in people. The main thing you actually need to do is put time into people. If you've got someone young working in your business, whether it's a family member, whether it's a staff member, whoever it is, actually invest time in them. Share your knowledge, share your passion. Get them on board by understanding why we're even here, what we're doing. And the one thing that I think we do really poorly within agriculture is show some appreciation. So often what we'll do is we'll try and set up a system where we're going to reward someone if we make more money. Let's give them a profit incentive. Money's a horrible motivator of people. If they're already earning a certain amount of money that gets them comfortable, money becomes a horrible motivator of people. But you know what works incredibly well? Is you get to the end of a hard week and you say, geez, we would have been stuffed without you. That was a big week. Here, I've put a slab of beer on your front seat, or there's a box of chocolates on your front seat, or, hey, I know you've put in a lot over this last 2 months. I've actually organised a night away for you guys. So in your business, what's a night away cost? $200? You will get more out of actually saying thank you to someone and rewarding them with a $200 night away than you will out of giving them a $2,000 pay rise. Actually show people some appreciation. We can invest in our people much better. Now, the other part for all of us is that this is bigger than just us. I've mentioned it a couple of times, but as an industry, I think we do a horrible job of promoting ourselves in that all we ever talk about is we work harder than everyone else. It's dusty. It's dry. Sheep are stupid. Sheep are hard to work with. Why would anyone come into our industry? If that's how we talk about it. We're at the premier event for sheep in our country, and a fair few people who have been on that stage have told me how hard it is. That's not selling our industry to anyone. Any wonder the young people are going cropping, because we do a horrible job of promoting ourselves. So there's an opportunity for all of us to look at what we're doing, look at how we talk about our industry, pause, reflect, understand how we can make it easier. I think we work against sheep. I think you can let that sink in for a minute, that as an industry, we work against sheep. It makes no sense. All we spend our time trying to do is make them do something they don't want to do and then blame them for it. So there's an opportunity for us to slow down, understand what's happening, and think about it. I'm going to leave you where we started, and that's with this. We can all be better. Thanks very much. I've left you plenty of time for questions.